I love Elden Ring. Like, a lot. I love it more than my partner, which, to be fair, isn't difficult as they don't exist, but you get the point. I genuinely think Elden Ring, alongside its expansion, might just be the greatest video game ever made. Which is why it pains me so much to admit that I just do not like Elden Ring Nightreign. And it's not the game's fault, it's mine. To understand why, first we need to look at what this game actually is. Nightreign is unlike anything FromSoft have made before. A roguelike, in which over the course of 3 runs you collect loot, defeat enemies and field bosses, and increase your strength in order to face off against one of the 8 end bosses, called Night Lords. The other major hook is the fact this is a 3-player co-op focused game. You and 2 party members each select from one of 8 pre-built classes, each with their own backstories and particular build focus. These range from your standard knight class, to ranged and magic options, more skill-based characters, and even one that predominantly uses spirit summons. Each class is a selection of starting equipment that will be swapped out and replaced as you progress through a run with improved loot, found by exploring the map and defeating bosses. Each also has 3 specific character abilities that remain throughout. These include 1 passive ability, 1 character skill, and 1 ultimate art. Whereas the former buffs your character no matter what, the latter 2 need charging up through defeating enemies. But these abilities are extremely powerful, and will help whittle down an enemy's health far quicker and more efficiently, as well as having some other unforeseen bonuses too. And you'll need to do that, because Nightreign plays incredibly fast. Once you're deployed onto the map, the gameplay loop revolves around you sprinting towards key buildings and targets, using the newly included super sprint function. This is something you'll want to use all the time, as it's essential to pick up key upgrades like flask charges and improve loot as quickly as possible. Navigation is further assisted with a double wall jump ability, letting you ascend cliff sides more easily than in vanilla Elden Ring. Well, that's the theory anyway. In practice it can be a bit finicky to use and not always work as intended. There are also spirit streams, similar to those you used on Torrent in the original game, though this time can be used without your spectral steed. And there's also spectral hawks that can carry you from one side of the map to the other in double quick time. But why do you need to go so fast? Well, because a ring of rain called the Night's Tide will quickly start to close in, making more and more of the map inaccessible until you reach a centre point near a small Erd tree and are forced to take on the boss of that day's run. Once the run is over, either by defeating the Night Lord or more likely by dying, you'll return to Round Table Hold. You won't go home empty-handed though, as you'll be rewarded with both Merc, this game's version of runes or currency, as well as a handful of relics. These are a vital part of the game's loop, as you apply them to each character separately to give a permanent buff for all future runs. You have to balance different coloured relics with a small inventory tailored to each class, meaning you have to make sure you use each one effectively. The Round Table Hold has also had a makeover, or should that be breakdown? But as much as it might be falling apart, it also acts as the base of operations in Nightreign. From here you can choose your character, practice their movesets, and chat to all the others in your free time. You can also read these journal entries, which acts as the lore for why each character is fighting here. You can also visit the adorable Small Jar Bazaar to buy emotes, specific upgrade relics, and other secret items that may prove useful. And you can play dress up with your character at the Mirror, including discovering many costumes that may be familiar to fans of the Souls series. But now here's where things take a turn. Nightreign might be a multiplayer focused game, and it very much says so based on previews and marketing. But it does still very much present the option for solo play. Before any expedition you can choose whether to play in multiplayer or single player mode. In theory you'd think that would mean the game's difficulty would be balanced with that in mind. Lower enemy health, less damage taken, less enemy encounters, etc, etc. But it kinda isn't. I don't really want to play multiplayer. I don't enjoy playing multiplayer games. I love FromSoft games because they're single player focused. Now of course it's absolutely fine for them to change and adapt that, develop something new with a different audience in mind. But if that's the case, then don't give the option for single player, because people will go into the game thinking it's a viable option, when it just isn't. The single player experience is awful. Whilst enemies do have a bit less health and deal a bit less damage, the amount of them remains the same, meaning you're having to constantly face large groups of enemies just to gain any basic loot. It means fights take 3 times as long as they should, which is one thing when you have all the time in the world. But when you're also up against the clock to kill the enemies before the Night's Tide moves in, it just becomes frustrating. And even once you do get past everything and get to the Night Lord boss at the end, that's when single player is at its worst. These encounters just do not work in single player. Attacks are focused to go in all directions, The various puzzle elements are meant to be solved by 3 players concurrently, and oftentimes you'll be overwhelmed by aggression that's supposed to be split between 3. And look, I just don't think anything can be done to change that as a developer. Designing a boss that can work both against 1 player and against 3 outside of just changing health and damage numbers isn't really possible. Basically what I'm saying is the only people who'd enjoy the single player experience of Nightreign are those crazy challenge streamers who like to make this incredibly difficult series of games even harder for themselves, which is fair enough. But for everyone else, playing in co-op is the only realistic option to have any chance of enjoying Nightreign. And that's just not for me. But that isn't my only gripe with Nightreign. I honestly don't understand the need for the Knight's Tide Circle at all. The game is plenty challenging enough just having to make split-second decisions choosing where to go and what loot to pick up. The fact that you're very quickly cut off from potentially run-defining gear feels like a pressure that didn't need to be added. The map also isn't best suited for this type of gameplay. On more than one occasion I found myself getting stuck at the bottom of a cliff while the rain slowly kills me and there being nothing I could do. Games like PUBG and Fortnite always afford you the ability to escape the oncoming storm, but Nightreign doesn't. Then there's the repetition. Despite being ostensibly a roguelike, the variety between runs lacks any meaningful change. The map is basically the same every time, a distorted version of Limgrave called Limveld. Building locations change from run to run, but the buildings and encampments themselves are always the same, with the same enemies and bosses within. Apart from loot drops and mini-bosses, the only meaningful changes happen during what are called shifting earth events. These alter a portion of the map in some way, and can range from a crater opening up filled with lava and fire enemies, to a forest emerging full of scarlet rot, and a snowy mountain full of ice magic. Now these do provide a bit of variety, as well as access to unique loot and enemies, but there's only 4 of them in total, and they don't change within themselves much like the map doesn't. Now, of course, a lot of what I've discussed here could be updated in further patches and DLCs, and I strongly believe a much larger variety of maps and random events would go some way to alleviate some issues with Nightreign. I mean, there's only 1 enemy type from Shadow of the Erdtree anywhere to be found. Surely the devs will be keen to incorporate more of that excellent content. And that's to say nothing of the bosses from previous games too. In total, there's 6 bosses brought back from Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3. But surprisingly, no normal enemies, or anything at all from FromSoftware's other titles. One of the game's biggest marketing draws was the fact bosses like Nameless King were appearing in Nightreign, so it's a real shame more hasn't been made of this unique idea in the game's present state. The point of me making this video is to prepare fans of previous FromSoft games as to what to expect from Nightreign, and ask whether someone like me, who only wants the solo experience, should check this title out. There will be a lot of people who love what it offers. Intense combat challenges, strategy and planning as a group, and some of the most spectacular and difficult boss design From has ever created. For some, that will be more than enough to sate them. But the reasons I fell in love with these games are for the isolated feeling that you're just a small part of a much larger whole, for the exploration and sense of wonder and discovery, for the build variety and chance to experiment, fail, rebuild and retry, for the ability to face seemingly insurmountable challenges at your own pace, figuring out your own solutions to these gargantuan tasks, and for a deep, compelling narrative that asks you to piece it together yourself. All of that has been stripped away here. This is not a sequel to Elden Ring. If you're waiting for a new single-player Souls-like to sink your teeth into, Lies of P Overture is out later this year, or go check out the first Berserker, which I reviewed a few months ago. Nightreign is most certainly not what you're looking for. If your favourite elements of Elden Ring are the combat, mechanics and unique multiplayer, then you'll absolutely get a kick out of what Nightreign is offering. Sadly, as someone who enjoys other elements of these games, I can't say the same. Nightreign just isn't for me.